We've heard today there's potentially a major breakthrough in the war in the Middle East. Israel and Hamas have apparently agreed to a 5-day ceasefire, with Hamas set to release women and children hostages. The Washington Post reported this deal was brokered by the US, but White House National Security spokeswoman Adrienne Watson has denied the report. She says there's no deal reached yet, but they're still trying to sort one out. But Sky News host Sharri Markson, our colleague of course, tweeted this earlier today: "I've confirmed the Washington Post story is in principle correct. Israel has agreed to a deal for the release of hostages in exchange for a limited ceasefire." Now, it all sounds well and good, Kel, because who doesn't like the idea of fewer people being killed? But is it not a reality that if you have a ceasefire, you give Hamas the opportunity to come back to grips, retool, and then everything goes on as it was?
And you've got to be realistic. Hamas are war criminals. That's what they are. We can call them terrorists or whatever we like, but they are war criminals. They're committing a crime. And they keep, not only was October the 7th just a string of war crimes, but they're still committing war crimes to this day. So that they keep committing war crimes by keeping more than 200 people, civilians hostage. And the big war crime that they keep committing the whole time is putting their military assets in the middle of civilian populations. I mean, the World War II equivalent would be Hitler putting a V2 rocket launcher in the middle of Paris, so that when the RAF attacked, they made sure lots of civilians were killed. These are war criminals. You don't say, let's have a ceasefire with war criminals. You say to them, surrender. There's no. Now, I know Sharri's sources are excellent, but I really hope this is not the case. I hope there won't be a ceasefire. These are war criminals. They have to be defeated until they surrender.
I'm absolutely sure there won't be a ceasefire, and that is because they will call it a pause. And this is all about semantics. It's very appropriate that we have Kel on the panel tonight, because this is all about semantics. This is not actually about what happens or whether there is, and you'll see that there were different ways of wording it, even in the Washington Post example, even the way Sharri very carefully worded it. A ceasefire, what you might call a temporary ceasefire, is what other people would call a pause. Now, the US, for very, very good reasons, and Israel, for very, very good reasons, cannot use the word ceasefire to describe whatever deal it is they have or haven't struck. They cannot call it a ceasefire, because a ceasefire implies there is a legitimacy of both sides, that there are two sides who are both abiding by the rules of war, who would therefore both agree to the terms of a ceasefire, as if each of them both have legitimate grievance and a legitimate authority. And that, of course, disregards the fact that Hamas committed these horrendous acts that began the latest round of fighting. So you wouldn't countenance having a ceasefire with ISIS in normal circumstances. You wouldn't countenance having a ceasefire with Al-Qaeda or a group like that. And Hamas is now starting openly behaving like them. But what they will, I think, talk about is Israel agreeing to a pause in its own campaign, for example, because it has the authority, the rationality and the restraint to be able to do that, in exchange for Hamas handing over some of the hostages,
but only some
or development getting in, or aid getting in. That's
nothing should happen until all the hostages are released. You can't have any progress until every single one of those civilians is free.
But you can't even have any progress after that.
How do you guarantee, Caroline, so we're going to have a pause, a humanitarian pause, whatever you want to call it, that Hamas is going to play by the rules? I mean, Hamas doesn't have rules.
Well, they don't have rules, and you can't know. But no doubt there has been a lot of international pressure for there to be some kind of pause, which I think is a much more appropriate word to use. And if Israel have done the maths on this, Israel have done the risk strategy on this, if they can extract, and we don't know how many hostages it is, but I'm pretty sure for a 5-day pause it would be a significant number of hostages. If they can get those people out, that deals with a domestic political issue, and it also helps deal with an international political issue. So I think it's a middle ground. I don't think anyone loves it. I think it's about 70% of what they want, but ultimately it does just take the pressure off them for the time being. But don't worry, it's only 5 days. There is not a whole lot that Hamas can do in the meantime. And remember, Israel is still on the ground in Gaza. So it's not as though, okay, there'll be a pause, but it's not like they'll be in territory.
And that's kind of the fine line Israel has to walk here, Liz, because we know that Israel has always put a very high price on the lives of its people. And so it first and foremost wants to recover those hostages.
Yeah, and this
but
really,
at what potential cost does that come for the elongation of the war?
About, I'm not getting excited about anything because you can't negotiate with terrorists. We have no details on this whatsoever. Apparently it's a 6-page agreement. I've heard 50 hostages, I've heard 70. We actually don't have anything that we can rely on. But what it does do is, if Israel were to make such a deal, is lend even more legitimacy to their claims of, if you just gave us back our people, we would down tools. Now, they've been called all sorts of things over the last few weeks, saying, well, that's not true, is it? That's not true. You wouldn't really do that. This proves once and for all, if Israel do strike this deal, that they mean it. They will go to a pause for 5 days just to get 50, 70, however many hostages. Rumour has it all of those hostages would be women and children. So once again, desperate to get those particular hostages back. And yet at the same time, it makes absolutely no sense because we know both these sides have repeatedly sworn to wipe each other off the face of the planet. So it is legitimately a race to annihilation. That's what this war is.
And that's my issue. Where does it actually end? Because so you get the hostages back,
this is not
and then
about
after
ending,
that,
though.
5 days later, the war continues on as it was.
But you get your hostages back.
Sure.
So at
That's
least
right. This is not
Israel
about
will have
ending.
They're
something
trying
to
to
show
impress
for
the
it.
Western world, OK? They're trying to impress Western leaders, but it will only impress reasonable people. The people who are on the streets protesting are hard lefties. They're not going to change their minds. They've decided that, despite the fact that Israel has got nothing to do with Gaza and left it in 2005, it's a colonial power. All of these stupid things, their heads are making no sense whatsoever. Now, if they're not making any sense, they won't be impressed by what Israel does, whatever it does.
Oh,
So you'll
Israel's
never
not trying
flip
to
those
impress
people.
them.
You'll never flip those people. What you want to do is isolate them more and more and make sure that when they are increasingly being pushed into a corner where they are aligning themselves with Hamas and aligning themselves with more and more ridiculous and unbelievable and unrealistic assertions, like, for example, that there are no military installations under hospitals or tunnels under hospitals, or that Hamas never killed or beheaded or burnt babies. They are backing themselves into a corner at the rate of knots. When the focus goes from that to Israel also doing some pretty heavy stuff, then Israel starts to lose its moral high ground, not among the crazies who will always back Palestine no matter what, but among the people in the middle. And it's always the middle that wins the day. So Israel knows that if it can be seen to be acting in good faith and say, okay, we'll stop bombing you for a second and you can return the women and children. And again, Hamas could have taken the men and it wouldn't even have been as severe as it was with what they did. It's the extremity of what they did, not just the nature of it or that they did it that is the problem. So if Israel does that, if they get those back, right, then it looks like Israel has actually acted in good faith. And so Israel can say, look, we are again the good guys. We deserve the US's backing and the UN is being too hard on us. And then they can resume their campaign against Hamas, having, after this pause, which is not a ceasefire, because a ceasefire implies that North Korea and South Korea are in a ceasefire. That's what a ceasefire looks like. That's still ongoing. That would mean that you then abandon your claim.
But if you try
the other out, Israel still must
if you
wipe
try to
Hamas
persuade
out.
the middle ground, there's no point in trying to make the UN think better of you because they're not the middle ground.
Trust me, Israel is not trying to make the UN
You make the UN look more unreasonable to most people, and that is what is all about the eye of the reasonable person.
I don't think this is a PR stunt. Like, why are you looking at it through that lens? Israel just wants their hostages back.
They want as many of their hostages back as they want.
Then they're happy to do it.
That's right, but it's also not a coincidence that this deal, should it exist, was brokered by America.
But the fact that it's brokered by the US is an absolute joke. They're funding both sides of the war, and we all know it. They've even admitted. Just last week, they unlocked $10 billion to Iran. Weeks before the first conflict blowout, they unlocked $6 billion. They know exactly what they're doing. Matt Miller,
I think that's a little bit different to the funding and the support they're giving to Israel.
No, but they have been asked, you know what Iran is going to spend this money on, given what's currently going on in the world, can't have escaped your notice. And Matt Miller, spokesperson for the Biden administration, has said, yeah, we know Iraq's always been a disruptor, that's what Iran does. They know exactly what they are doing. This is an unhinged, mentally psychotic time to be unleashing any funds to Iran, and
Well,
they're doing
I think the person
anyway.
who brokered that deal is now mysteriously on unpaid, unseen, extended leave
It's not
from
a
the State
one-person
Department.
job.
But yes,
we all know
it's
there's
very,
way
it's a
more
different,
people
But
involved.
to say the US's support for Iran is the same as its support for Israel is another form of completely false moral equivalency.
Well, I
yes,
did
they might
not
have
say
been naive.
that.
They might have
I
been
did
naive,
not say
but you
that.
said
I
they're
simply
supporting both
said
sides.
I said they are funding both
They're
sides
funding
of the
both
war, and
sides.
they've been
That's-
pulled up
it's-
on it and have admitted it outright. We all know what Iran stands for. So why are you giving them $10 billion just last week?
But that's like saying if I give $100 to St Vincent de Paul or the Salvos and they go and do good works and I see a homeless person and say, oh, I feel sorry for you, mate. Here you go, I'll give you $100, and then he runs off and spends it on crack, that I'm funding both sides.
No, but you know what you're doing. But you know what you're doing when you're giving them.
taken
The
for a bit of a ride.
Iranian president literally
You know what you're
laughed
doing.
when asked, are you going to spend this on humanitarian aid as you've promised
That's
to?
right. They were
He
hopelessly
laughed and
naive,
said
but-
verbatim, we will spend it however we
The
want
US
to.
has Israel's back 100%, and they've already, I believe, bombed Iranian installations in
Please, the
Syria.
Dems there are
the
as
idea
bad
that
as Labour here. They talk out of both sides of their
Look,
mouth,
Biden
but
hasn't.
we all
Biden
know
has
where
not.
their
Biden
real
has been
loyalties
behind
lie,
Israel
Joe.
100%.
I agree
Whether he
with
knows
that.
it or not is another
I agree with
question,
that.
but
I agree Biden has
On
done a
that
better
we can
job than
agree.
most world leaders on this issue.
Yeah.
He has actually stood up and talked about it.